Hey there, guys. What's up? What's up? And welcome to Behind the Crypto podcast. I'm Mike G, and I'm your guide and host as we go on some amazing adventures with some of the sharpest minds in the Web3 world, finding out about their projects and how they're changing the landscape. Today's conversation is going to be a real exciting one. We've got Aki, co-founder and CEO from dlcBTC. Aki, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you with us. Great to have you with us. I know we've spoken before, Aki, and we've kind of I've had the pleasure to get to know you a little bit and your project. But for the listeners who don't know who you are, would you mind just doing a quick intro, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the projects as well?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Aki Balogh was born in Hungary, grew up in Boston and Michigan. We moved out in 91 when I was a kid. I've been writing code for almost 30 years. Actually, instead of high school, when I was 15, instead of high school, I went to a community college for computer science. And then I had some other kind of different jobs, management consulting, did a private equity internship, ended up at a VC fund in Boston called OpenView, where I was the first associate in 2011, looking at AI, machine learning, big data, distributed computing, that kind of stuff. I actually heard about Bitcoin in 2011. One thing you should know about me, I have terrible timing because I heard about Bitcoin in 2011, but I was so focused on the AI stuff that I didn't get in. And then then I ended up starting an AI company, which I led for 8 years. I invented a way to use machine learning to optimize content for search. And we built a company called MarketMuse that provides software to many of the largest publishers like CBS Interactive, Informa, Home Depot, etc. And so I built that company, and then I came to crypto in 2021. Crypto crashed, AI shot up, and so I am definitely like the Jim Cramer of picking startup swim lanes. But anyway, I've definitely been So basically, I've been a builder, been an investor previously, and I'm excited to be here. I've been full-time in crypto for 3 years.
Amazing, amazing. Full-time for 3 years, but I bet you it feels like 30 years at times, huh?
It does. It does. And I will say, of course, like, yeah, I missed the big pump up, with from a wealth perspective, didn't do so well. ETH too, I heard about in 2016. Like, I missed a lot of the cool, early, amazing stuff. But there's still a lot to do. And a lot of the skills that I did, developed in my earlier company, I've been able to bring over. So there's a lot of, when it comes to like creating new things and building products and marketing them, there's just a lot of transferable skills. And so I do feel on one level, I feel bummed that I missed some of that or the big part of that. On the other hand, I feel kind of lucky that the crypto startup is my second startup, because crypto moves way faster. Like my last one was AI SaaS Web 2, but crypto is so much faster, 24/7 markets, global, there's a political angle. There's a lot of things that would be very hard to manage if I were like 23, 25 doing it. And now I'm 39. So I think that does make me maybe calmer and gives me the benefit of just a little bit of like, hindsight. So anyway, glad to be here, hoping to make a contribution with our project.
No, listen, great to have you. Great to have you on the podcast. I'm super interested to learn more about what you guys are doing. I mean, before we dive into the project that you're doing now, you obviously have this big background in the world outside of Web3, right? The Web2 world. You built up a successful business. How did you end up coming into the Web3 world? How did you get into the rabbit hole?
Yeah, it was actually a couple of things. So when I got MarketMuse to a point where like you get to a point as a founder after like 6-8 years where the roadmap's built out, the client list is there, the value props are solid, etc. And you sort of get to a point where it's like, okay, we're going to kind of keep building these products for years and years. I just wanted to do something different. And the company was, I don't want to say it was on autopilot because COVID happened, that really hit us. But then we reimagined the company as a product-led growth company. Like we kind of hit more like a steady state, and I was ready to basically just turn over the reins to somebody else. So we promoted our chief revenue officer to be our CEO there. and he's been running the biz ever since. A little bit of alpha. That company is getting acquired like next week or this week or something. So it'll be, by the time this goes live, it'll be acquired or at least announced. But anyway, you know, it's sort of like, okay, cool. That company is running. Let me see if I can make a bigger impact somewhere else. And then it was like, okay, should I be a VC? I don't know. I've done that before. I would happily do it again, but instead of like going right back into VC, I thought it'd be better to start a second company, take the lessons learned from the first one, and just build something that makes an impact. I also want to build things that help society or impact society positively. For me, that just kind of gives me more passion than just like making money or fame or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I think I could make an impact. Where could I do it? Well, crypto seems to be, you know, a very interesting space. It aligns with financial markets, which I've been on a hobby level interested in since I was, you know, 15, reading The Motley Fool and, you know, and all that. So it was just sort of a good combination of distributed computing, finance, crowdfunding, you know, the internet industry and how the internet's evolving, and a lot of other like concepts, you know, energy and things that I didn't even, you know, that are very interesting, privacy. So it just sort of hit on all my like nerd, you know,
Very
nerd
cool.
points.
Very cool. It kind of encompassed everything that you have an interest in. And how do you remember your, because for me, for example, the way I first got exposed to crypto was I remember I downloaded Coinbase. This was back in 2016, 17, you know, and I bought my first Bitcoin then or something like that. And that's kind of how I ended up in the Web3 world, right? What was that moment for you? Like, was it, I mean, you mentioned you kind of knew about Bitcoin back in 2011. So that's real OG.
Yeah. Well, my first contact was went to Burning Man in 2011. Somebody in the camp was using Bitcoin to make certain purchases, and
No
he showed me
way.
his like 9-step process for like going and like laundering the Bitcoin stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what this is, but this is very interesting and specific. And I'm like, okay, so that was like the criminal activity use case of Bitcoin. But I'm like, there must be other parts to it, because I was working at a database, distributed database company, and I'm like, this is just really fascinating. And then I'm like, cool, but I'm like, let me put that on pause because I wanted to start my AI thing.
Yeah.
And I just want to build an AI company. That was like my main goal. So you know, that was my first impact, or my first touch point. But then fast forward to 2020, 2021, my friend Vadim had built a very successful company called Alpha Point, and just knowing Vadim, brilliant person, and just seeing what Alpha Point was doing, and I actually helped them a little bit. I introduced them to a Hungarian friend of mine, and they ended up hiring him to build the Chivo wallet for El Salvador. And that's when Bitcoin got, you know, very much became a focus, because I was kind of looking at everything, Cosmos, etc. But when Chivo launched and it was getting like 250,000 daily active users, that's when I was like, okay, so Bitcoin has crossed the chasm. Everybody can understand Bitcoin because it's simple. Like ETH, you know, love ETH and DeFi, but it gets complicated quickly. You've got L2s and MEV and like all this stuff you have to wrap your head around, AMNs and whatever. And so Bitcoin, it's like you hold it and you send it, and that's kind of most of it. And it's very safe. And that's like, you know, of course there's building on Bitcoin, but back in 2021 especially, it was like, okay, Bitcoin is like anyone can grok it, anyone can kind of understand it. So what will you want to do if you have Bitcoin? You might want to take a loan, and where might want you to take the loan in Aave, but Aave cannot take native Bitcoin, and that's what kind of started me on the journey that led me to start what became dlcBTC.
Well, listen, that's wonderful. And thank you for, you know, leading the conversation that way, because I was going to say, we might as well talk a little bit about your project now, right? dlcBTC. You've obviously got the OG there in the name, the Bitcoin, the original, you've got it in the name. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing, maybe what problem you're solving, what the use case is. Give us a little bit of flavor in terms of what you guys are up to. What's the project's about?
Yeah, totally. So the pain point, original pain was very simple. I got some Bitcoin miners. It's mining Bitcoin, and I was like, cool, maybe I could like take a loan on it, on that Bitcoin, and I wanted to put it into Aave specifically. And then I learned you have to wrap it. So you have to like swap your Bitcoin for wBTC. And I'm like, cool, what's wBTC? Oh, wait a moment, it's this centralized thing. Well, how does that work? So I've got the most decentralized asset in the digital asset in the world, and I send it to one location with wBTC to use an Aave, which is one of the most decentralized, protocols. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And so that's when I learned about DLCs, and this is sort of the precursor to what we do now. And so most people, I'd like to jokingly say that half of my job is just telling people about DLCs, because there's not a lot of people are familiar. So basically, Bitcoin does not have smart contracts, but it does have discrete log contracts, which were invented 6 years ago at MIT by the creator of the Lightning Network, Taj Strija, and they were implemented 3 years ago with Taproot. And so they are not like expressive smart contracts, but they're more like an if-then statement. So if some condition, which is evaluated off-chain from something called a DLC oracle, but if something, then A or B, else B or C or whatever. And so you can have a number of outcomes. And the point of the DLC is that these outcomes are predetermined. So you can have, typical example of like Alice and Bob, and they agree to some number of predetermined outcomes that they pre-sign. And when they deposit their Bitcoin into this DLC contract or pseudo contract, they pre-sign these outcomes. And so from there on, that's the only place the Bitcoin can go. And then later this DLC oracle sort of publishes which outcome, won or whatever, like in the case of a bet or something like that, who won. And then the Bitcoin goes to the pre-agreed place. So that's kind of the if-then statement. And then we've sort of taken that to build dlcBTC, which is a safer replacement to wBTC.
So it's a replacement, and maybe just taking a step back, it's a replacement because it still allows Bitcoin to be a decentralized asset, whereas before it had to become a centralized asset. That's quite interesting. I personally, I've never come across what's it called? DLCs.
dlcBTC. It's a mouthful. It is a mouthful.
I've never come across the concept before until we've started. I mean, there's so many new concepts in Web3, right? But that's a concept I've never. How did you come across the whole concept of DLC? Why did you decide that path to start something?
Yeah, so it was and so by the way, the name, like we thought about, should we make it like dBTC or something? We're like, no, let's pay homage to the DLC invention, because it's really the DLC magic. It wasn't us. I'm not a cryptographer. I didn't invent it, but it was really Taj's invention and his idea that enabled what we use today. And so we wanted to kind of basically teach people what DLCs are by calling it dlcBTC. Yeah, but basically when I was looking at I was watching the MIT open courseware on the Bitcoin class that you can watch for free and kind of learning up on it. And around that time, and when Chivo launched, I started looking for what could be built using Bitcoin. And my friend Pablo, who's now at Noster, but he was head of R&D at Swan eventually, but the guy I've known for over 10 years, he's like, hey, take a look at DLCs. And there was a DLC community. It was started by a company called Shortbits, Chris Stewart and Nadav Cohen, who spent years working on DLCs. Sadly, that company is no longer around, but their work lives on. And there were some other DLC companies like Atomic Finance and so on. And so basically met these folks and we're like, okay, this is something interesting because they're building on Bitcoin L1 versus we also end up getting a big grant from Stacks and so on. But there were these Stacks and RSK, and there were kind of various levels of like what now is called Bitcoin L2. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. But what if you use the power of Bitcoin L1? Then you don't have to bridge, because basically there's basically like 3 ways to get Bitcoin into another chain like ETH. One is to use a centralized custody, wBTC is obviously the big one. Binance has one called BTCB. Coinbase is soon going to launch one called cbBTC. One entity holds the assets. Very cool, especially if the entity is trusted, but downside is you have to trust the entity if anything happens. Like, RenBTC was one where the funds, they were purchased by Alameda, and then Alameda, went out, and then wBTC was also, they took wBTC with it. So the trusted entity is sort of the problem there. The other way is you can bridge it. So you can send Bitcoin to a collection of nodes. This is what TBTC does, what all the Bitcoin L2s do, like BitLayer, Stacks. You send your Bitcoin to a specific number of nodes, and they hold the Bitcoin in custody. The problem with that is if something happens to the nodes, if they're hacked, like you are no longer on Bitcoin security once you've sent it to somebody else's node, you're reliant on their security and so on. And, everyone tries their hardest, but crypto bridges get hacked all the time. So the bridging thing ends up being a challenge. And so we've invented a third method we call self-wrapping, where our depositors lock a Bitcoin with themselves. They use this DLC mechanism to take the Bitcoin and move it into a DLC that can only pay out to them. It's like if-then statement, but there's only
like their own bank.
It's their own escrow, actually. It's their self-escrowing.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I try to avoid the word escrow only because in traditional finance, escrow is like somebody else holding it, an escrow provider. But what if your money escrows itself? That's like a weird metaphysical, but that's what it does. Yeah,
that's
Bitcoin
amazing.
locks itself.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So you guys have been going how long now?
Yeah, so we started the project 2.5 years ago, and we just launched to Arbitrum a few months ago, and Base this week.
Amazing.
And then ETH mainnet next week, and then some other chains from there.
Very cool. Very cool. I mean, there's huge momentum at the moment on Base, right? There's huge momentum on Base. I mean, some of those chains you mentioned, Arbitrum, huge momentum there. What is the goals then? What are the goals that you're seeing with the project? And what are the goals for you personally, Aki? You've obviously had this huge entrepreneurial journey and it continues. Like, where do you see yourself going? What are the aspirations for you and the project?
Yeah, well, look, I guess maybe 2 levels of answering that question. With initial goal, like any founder, is to get the cash flow positive. I think that often might get forgotten in this industry where you can like launch a token and do stuff with it. But basically, like build a great product, a reasonable price, sell a bunch of it, be able to get the cash flow positive so we can, our revenues are more than our expenses. Then we built a business. Like that is, as a person who's looking to build a business, that's number one. And then number 2 is really like my broader goal is more aspirational. I want to do things that help society. I think Bitcoin can play that role for a number of reasons. I think that DeFi is great. I think Ethereum's a great ecosystem. We're also going to launch on Solana and other ecosystems. So it's not the only one, but it's a good one to launch on. There's, Base and Arbitrum. Like these are pretty cool places where there's a lot of trading activity. So we want to solve this problem of wBTC. You briefly mentioned it, but there's a lot of challenges with wBTC, especially at the moment. So some of those centralization concerns are now playing out, and we're seeing that. And then we can talk about that. And then I guess my third level goal is just, I want to make an impact. So I was just talking to a Congressman Ro Khanna the other day, who I just met. I don't know him well. I just met him. And I kind of mentioned that I'm like, I'm 39 at this point in my career. I want to make an impact, a positive impact. So, happy to, just kind of be part of the process here, because I think what the entire industry is doing, it's really special. And I just want to see, I want the world and, traditional finance and so on to recognize the power and the importance of what we're all working to build. So a lot of kind of like education type stuff, I would say.
I love that. I love that. I think it's interesting. I had a couple of weeks ago, who was it? I can't remember now, but I had a guest on the podcast and they said something so powerful that, crypto and Web3 should be considered more of an evolution of money rather than a revolution, right? And the concept being, a revolution is it's quite aggressive, right? It's a bit combative, right? Whereas an evolution is the natural growth process that everything goes through. And I think even what you're saying here, we're seeing institutions get involved, BlackRock coming in into Bitcoin, into ETFs, and so many other big players coming in as well. I think, the next few years could be very, very exciting for Web3 and crypto, right? Listen, on that note, we have to talk about this. I'm going to guess in my mind kind of what your answer is going to be, but I'm curious to what your answer will be. if you like, what is Aki's favorite token or coin, and why? Like, what would it doesn't have it's not advised, it's nothing like that. It's just your personal favorites.
Yeah, so I can't say I'm a great trader, but I do, I look at, chains, like even big ones like ETH and Solana, and then I look at individual projects, and sometimes I forget what I have, so it's hard taking notes on sometimes the different chains, like which wallet is what's in that wallet. But personally, I'm kind of interested in this quantum stuff. Like that's my like new hobby. When I have free time, and over the last few weeks, I haven't had a lot of free time. I'm flying to Singapore tonight. Like there's a lot going on for dlcBTC, which I'm very grateful for. But when I have free time, I try to read up on quantum programming and quantum, just how the quantum world. And there's some quantum post quantum algorithms that are interesting, and that's just kind of, and there's some post quantum blockchains that people are launching, and it's starting to be like a thing. I think that's just, maybe it's, I don't know if it'll be like a whole revolution, or maybe it's just another evolution. But I think that anything with post quantum in it is just something that comes up on my radar.
It hits that spot. You start looking into it. That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, listen, look, just to wrap up, I think it's been super fascinating listening to you. You've shared some real golden alpha to the listeners, so very, very grateful for you for that. What is the narrative? Just to wrap up, what is the narrative at the moment that you're seeing in the Web3 space that you're quite bullish about? Like something that you're quite excited that you're like, oh, this could be a game changer.
Yeah, we primarily work with institutions, traders, and large houses. So regulation is a big deal. I would even say, there's a lot of speculation and talk about regulation in the US. I think the climate is improving. I think that's, even watching the debates last night, it was interesting to see. Obviously, crypto didn't come up as a line item, but I think we're having a lot more dialogue than previously, which is great. So I'm very positive on regulation. BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, they're getting into their tokenizing assets, which is, they're not just, okay, they did the spot ETFs and that's like step one, but they're actually tokenizing assets, which is kind of the next level. Obviously in offshore or other jurisdictions like Singapore, UAE, there's even more possible. Hong Kong, they had the ETF, the ETH ETF. And I actually, I would say, I'm not an expert on China, but I wouldn't be shocked if in the next 3 to 5 years, China would change its stance on Bitcoin and kind of be a little bit more pro. It's hard to know, and I'm, again, not an expert, but I think we're past the point where I think next year is going to be a really big year from a regulation, for positive news about regulation after so much negative news this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting because at Cryptorsy, we focus a lot on RWAs at the moment, right? It's a big growing narrative in the Web3 space. And it's interesting because they come with the camp of almost being more grown up, if that makes sense. Like they like KYC, they like regulation, or maybe not like, but they play in that realm, right? Which almost feels anti-crypto because crypto has always been kind of running away from that. But I really think that a big part of that evolution of bringing more people on board, making it safer, making it a place where everybody wants to be part of, is people need to feel that there's trust there, right? And I think part of the KYC, part of all the due diligence and all the regulation is exactly for that, right? So
and it'll kind of bifurcate. You'll always have the privacy focused people and privacy focused products, and that's what, like, one ecosystem. And then you'll have mainstream, but mainstream adoption will have, like laws and regulations that can be programmatically, built into the smart contract. You won't even know it's there, kind of stuff, but then will really expand access. And that will cause, I think, a lot of money to flood into the space and attention, and that will turn crypto into a very, I'm in New York, so I see all the banks, like they're all here, and when they are all able to get engaged, it's gonna really, it's gonna be fascinating. It's gonna be really huge.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast, Aki. Before we wrap up, I always ask the guests for one of two things. Either, leave the listeners with a motivational quote, or you can maybe leave us, you know, you've built a company in the past, you've been very successful with it, you're now building your second project in the Web3 world. It could be a piece of advice for the listeners. So either a motivational quote or a piece of advice, whatever you want to go with, sir.
Yeah, maybe I'll quickly do both. Piece of advice: guard your mental health. You know, just the emotional control of being a founder that was the biggest thing that surprised me. I didn't expect to learn, but I learned a lot. The quote is from Margaret Mead: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
I love that. Never doubt that a small group of individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that has. Who wrote that? Who said that?
Margaret Mead.
Margaret Mead. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for that contribution. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this interview. This has been Mike G from Cryptorsy with Aki from dlcBTC. I look forward to seeing you on the next show. See you at the top.